Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today, we're pleased to have as our guest Blaine Burraston, Certified Athletic Administrator, Director of Athletics at Millard High School. Blaine, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Hutch, it's good to be here today.
Let's have you begin by sharing with our listeners here in Utah and across the country where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job.
Okay, I'm actually not too far from home. I was born and raised in Delta, Utah, so I'm about 30 minutes from home is all. So I'm kind of the ultimate trader. Grow up in Delta and teach at Millard. It's almost sacrilege to do things like that. But so I grew up just on the other side of the county from where I am now. Like most coaches and ADs, I grew up playing ball. Every little league sport, you can think of. Kind of fell in love with football, baseball, basketball eventually. Went to Delta High School. I was a three-sport athlete at Delta High. Those three, I was lucky enough to play football for Dean Fowles while I was at Delta. Graduated there in 1997 and went on to SUU. While I was at SUU, majoring in PE, married my high school sweetheart. We got married in 99. Almost got done with school before we had kids. My oldest, Austin, was born in December before I finished school in May that year, my last year at SUU. And then a couple years after that, had my daughter Shaylee. She just graduated from Millard High. She'll be 18 this week, actually. Graduated in 2002 from SUU with a degree in PE and chemistry. Somewhere along the line, somebody told me it was a good idea to throw science on with my PE degree so I could always find a job, which actually worked out really well because that's how I got my first job. Graduated from SUU in 2002. And that summer was just one of those years where there wasn't lots of job openings. There wasn't very many out there. So I applied for everything that I could think of and anything that came up. And I ended up getting an interview at Tinnick High School in Eureka, which is about an hour and 15 from here. It was about an hour from Delta, so close to home still. They were looking for multiple subjects, 1A school, so multiple subjects, but mostly science, PE, and they needed a baseball coach. And so I applied for that one, went up and interviewed, and it's still, 20 years later, it's still one of the most memorable interviews I've ever sat through in my life. Got to sit down, and there was like 15 people in the room. I mean, most interview committees are, a few people, principal, vice principal, some parents, and this, that, the other. But there's like 15, and all men, 15 men sitting around this table. And went through the interview, asked a ton of questions. A couple days later, the principal calls and offers me the job. So, of course, I took it because it was late. It was like July. It was late in the summer. And he said, we'd like you to take this job. It's going to be some chemistry, a little bit of something else, and some PE classes, and we need a baseball coach. That's great. Any chance you can come up and visit with me? And so me and my wife jump in the car the next week and go up to visit. And he showed us around the school and showed me the baseball field. And we chatted for, an hour and a half. He says, I'll get your paperwork sent to you. So in the next few days, my contract shows up. And on the contract, it says teaching whatever, head baseball coach, head basketball coach, head track coach, athletic director. I've been out of school 6 weeks. And so here's this first contract with head coach of 3 sports, and you're going to be the AD and teach 4 different subjects. So a little overwhelming, but it turned out to be a really great experience. Tinnick High School was really good to me. I was there for 6 years, taught everything from math to chemistry to biology, health, PE, weight training, and coached 3 sports. And I was the athletic director for 6 years while I was there. So very time consuming, a little overwhelming. And then after I'd been there, those 6 years, we had my daughter along the way. And it was just time for something different. And the job came open here at Millard. They were looking for a biology teacher. And so I applied for the job and really wasn't biology certified. So I just threw it out there because it was close to home, and, I wanted my kids close to their grandparents and things like that. So I applied for the job and lucked out. The interview went great. Dennis Aldridge called me a couple of days after that and offered me the job. And I've been here for 14 years. This one coming up will be 15. So it's been a great experience here. They've been great to me. So we moved here in 2008, and I'm teaching biology and anatomy now. Been an assistant football coach the whole time I've been here, 14 years. Helped with basketball, coached with Stony Myers until he gave it up in 2013, and then I took over for 6 of those years. The next 6 years, also jumped in. I've been coaching softball for 10 out of the 14 years I've been here too. So, and then last year in February, when Nate Grosbeck decided he was going to retire, they opened up the AD job and actually hired 2 ADs. They hired me and Delise Fulmer, and so we both kind of have a part running the athletic program here at Millard. So, kind of in a nutshell, that's where I came from and where I am now.
That's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Let me follow up. So when you took the job at Tinnick, where were you living? In Cedar?
Yeah, we were in Cedar City. Yep, I had graduated and was working at one of the gas stations down there. Mm-hmm. And once that happened, we actually moved to Delta for a little while because that's where my family is. That's where my wife's family's from. Right. And then we actually moved to Santaquin for the first year that we were there. And that just got to be too much driving back and forth with as much as I was at the school. And so we moved to Eureka after my first year.
Okay, because I was wondering if you, commuted. I wonder if you took the old Highway 6 up to Eureka from Delta, but you moved to Santaquin and then back to Eureka.
Yep, we moved to Santaquin for that first year and made that trip for the first year that we were there.
Let me ask you a follow-up. Because I have something fairly much in common with Millard County. My father was born in Holden. My grandparents were born in Holden, and I'm not sure how many young kids are there now, but how many would you think get bused from Holden to Millard?
Quite a few, actually. We have lots of families with young kids that still live in Holden. At the high school, I'll bet we've got close to 40 or 50 maybe that come to the high school out of our 370 kids or whatever we've got. But there's a lot of kids that live in Holden.
And how does that work for example, if you've got football or basketball kids and they take the bus from Holden and you've got a late activity, do they send a separate bus?
The district used to do that. The district actually used to run an activity bus at about 5:30 and run the kids back to Holden and to Scipio and to Meadow and Kenoshko and the other way.
Right.
But they don't do that anymore. The kids are kind of on their own to get home or, have parents get them there. A lot of our older kids that drive are really good about taking our young kids to those outlying towns.
Good. Well, I have, and also Rick Robbins, a good friend of mine, a famous athlete there.
Absolutely.
Probably someone further back than that. Do they still talk about Dave McKee there at Millard?
Oh yeah, we've heard Dave's name quite a bit.
Dave's actually my second cousin.
Oh, okay.
So his mother, as far as I understand, still lives in Holden.
I believe she's still there.
And so,
Yep.
yeah.
I don't know her personally, but I do think she's still there.
Yeah, it's kind of a small world. So share with us, Blaine, some of the mentors you've had in your life that have helped you along the way.
Okay. Absolutely my parents. I would have to start there. My dad was a backyard dad. He always had time to go in the backyard and shoot the basketball, throw the baseball. He's probably still got bumps and bruises and things like that from me hitting him with a baseball. Broken pieces of the fence and things like that around the yard. He was always super willing to spend time with me in the yard, and so I would have to start with him. My mom too. She was ultra supportive. I have those parents that never missed a game growing up. I can think of one little league game that they ever missed when I was growing up, clear through high school, and they're still that way. They miss very, very few of my own kids' activities. So they're very involved, very supportive. So definitely my parents. I mentioned that I was lucky enough to play football for Dean Fowles at Delta. He's a great mentor of mine. He's one of those guys that, even talking to you now, I have a hard time calling him Dean because he's always just Coach Fowles.
Sure.
And I have a hard time calling him by his first name. When I see him, he's still Coach. And honestly, he's probably the biggest reason that I do what I do. Just the relationship that we had when I was in high school, the relationship that we've had since high school, the times that I've called and asked him questions about different situations, whether it's discipline or, just dealing with kids in general. He's always been willing to visit with me and talk, games and kids and things like that. Dr. Steve Luntz at SUU. And I'm probably not the only one that's told you that. He was a great mentor to anybody that went through that program. Just a great person to know, great with people, great with kids. And I still look at a lot of the stuff that I got from him on a regular basis, dealing with, different situations with kids or parents or athletic director stuff or whatever it might be. But he was a really big one. When I got here to Millard, Marshall Sheriff kind of took me under his wing and helped me out, being the new guy, asked me to help him coach football. And still to this day, me and him have a great relationship. Dennis Aldridge was the principal when I got here. Those that know Dennis and how involved he did everything. He was the principal. He was the vice principal. He was the athletic director. He never missed a ball game. He does the radio. He did everything. And so he was another great one that was really, really good to me when I got here.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. Blaine, what's your biggest failure in life or disappointment, and what did you learn from it?
I've heard you ask this question to numerous people, and so I thought a little bit about it, and I consider it a failure. Some people would probably consider it maybe a learning opportunity or something. But my one biggest failure when I was a young coach was the failure to say no. I told you that I was coaching 3 sports. I was the AD. But I had a real problem in those first few years saying no to anybody about anything. And unfortunately, my family suffered. There was times where I'd go days without seeing them or talking to my kids, and honestly, I just wasn't a very good dad for a while there. And once that finally hit me and decided to fix that, it was a whole different world. My stress level went down. I was a better dad. I was a better teacher. I was probably a better coach. So, the failure to say no to things, you have to be able to not do everything and be okay with that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's probably a common theme to a lot of athletic directors, me included, of course. That would go back to the 80s for me. But it's tough when you want to be there for everybody and for the kids and for the coaches, and you have a tough time saying no. So you talked a little bit about your background before you became the AD. So basically in coaching, so you've been the AD at basically, this is your second school now, correct?
Yeah, it is. So I was kind of thrown into it when I got to Tinnick, and I was the AD there for 6 years. And I absolutely loved it. It was one of the very most favorite parts of my job. Our region, when I was there, I got to spend a lot of time with guys like Clayton Carter, and George Bruce, Travis Madsen, who was at Wasatch Academy.
Sure.
A lot of those guys, and still have really good relationships with them today. It's a whole different world now. Obviously I was about 13 years removed from being the AD before I started again here. But yeah, I was the AD for 6 years at Tinnick, and then it was mostly, do some scheduling, watch a few ball games, and that was really about it.
Well, so let's go into that a little bit further. So when you first became an AD, and I realize you've had some time off, so how has the job changed since you first started? I mean, you talked a little bit about it, get a couple of buses, but now at 2A school, Millard, and you're still coaching. So talk about that and how the job's changed, and about how you've got to budget your time.
I think that's the biggest one. And maybe I was just too young and stupid to realize it. But the amount of time that's involved is so much different for me now than it was then. And obviously, bigger school, we have more activities and things like that. So there is more of a time commitment, and you have to be better about, prioritizing your time. But there's so much more responsibility now. There's so much more concern about liability, and, hoping that somebody's not going to throw a lawsuit at you for some little thing that you overlooked. And I didn't, like I say, maybe I was just too dumb to understand it, but I didn't worry about that so much when I was at Tinnick. But that's one of my top concerns now, is making sure everybody's safe, making sure all of our venues are safe, making sure we can get medical personnel to places that they need to be, and things like that. And I think those are probably the things that a lot of people don't think about a whole bunch. They see it at a ball game, on game duty, or they see you taking tickets, or, those types of things, but they don't really understand all of the other stuff that we do on a daily basis to keep our kids healthy, to keep our buildings safe, to keep our venues safe, to keep our fans happy, and those kinds of things. So I think the biggest difference between my two stints is the amount of responsibility that the AD has now, more so than they used to.
Well said. Let's talk for a moment now. You recently became a certified athletic administrator, so I want you to talk a little bit about what it takes to become a CAA, and then talk about the exam, because everybody, including myself, even though it's been 30 years since I took the exam, everyone gets a little bit crazy about thinking it's an exam. So talk about the CAA and talk about your journey to attain that.
Okay. So this has really been kind of a short stint for me. So I took over as the AD in February last year, just in enough time to get registered for the conference, and kind of started there. I took 503 at the conference last year, the 21 conference. And so that was kind of my first look into some of the legal liability stuff. I took 501 and 502 online over the summer, just sat down over a couple days each and went through 501 and 502. And then I took 504 and 506 in the fall, also online. Those two are a little overwhelming. If it's something that you're not used to, I had heard bits and pieces about, 504 and 506 and the legal classes, And they're going to make you want to not be the AD after you take them and things like that. And I can see that. I can see why some people would have that perspective. But I actually really enjoyed those two classes because it gives you a totally different perspective of what we're doing on a daily basis and kind of the challenges that are out there as far as athletic administrators go and coaches and principals and things even. So I took those 5 classes within a year, and I was actually going to wait until the conference and take the tests at the conference, but I'm one of those guys that has to just cram stuff in and then get it back out. And so I ended up doing the test online. Reached out to a couple of guys. Rich Barton probably gets tired of hearing from me. I talked to Travis Madsen a couple of times about it because he had taken the test online. I talked to him about it. Right. And then just spend some time with the practice test that's on the website. Once you fill out your application and stuff, they send you the big packet of information, the PowerPoint presentation with questions, and I just pounded the practice test and the PowerPoint stuff, and then went back through the class materials with all 5 classes, and that was a huge help. The exam itself, I'll be honest, was a little bit different than I thought it was going to be. The guys that I talked to, said there's lots of legal questions. And so I really kind of geared myself up for that. And there is lots of legal questions, but not as many as I thought there was going to be. Lots of game management, those kinds of things. But as far as the exam goes, if you go back through your stuff, there's nothing out there that's going to surprise you. At least there wasn't for me. It was tough. The test was tough, but there wasn't really any big surprises on there.
Okay, well, so tell us. So you're a newer AD, and so you didn't hesitate. So you became a CAA as soon as you could. And of course, there's some ADs out there that we're still trying to light a fire under to become. So what was it that inside you that said, I need to get certified? Was it just a realization that the job is so big that that's an extra safeguard, or what was
that? That was the biggest part of it. It probably started at the conference last year. Talking about, and I think it was Rich that gave the presentation, if I remember right. But said something about there's never been litigation won against a school that's got a certified athletic director, and that was big for me. I mean, if that's one of those steps in keeping everybody safe and keeping everybody out of trouble, then I wanted to take care of that. And so that was probably the biggest motivator in getting my CAA done in a hurry, just to make sure that I kind of knew what was out there and what I was supposed to be looking for as far as all of our school stuff went.
Very good. Thanks so much for sharing that. Let's talk about your journey with the UIAAA. Now, I realize it hasn't been a long journey, but even though it's been a shorter journey, talk about that and talk about how you became involved and why it's important to be involved in this.
Okay. Yeah, it's been kind of a short trip so far. Like I say, started in about February of last year. And I probably need to take some of my own advice and get more involved, which I intend to do. The big one for me right now is the conference. That there's so many different items to pick up while you're there, so many good connections to be made with other people that are doing just exactly what I'm doing. And that background and that information and that resource that's out there is irreplaceable. So for me, that's kind of been the journey so far, is just making lots of connections, trying to learn as much as I can from guys that have been there for a while, like I say, I think Rich is probably tired of me emailing him about stuff. But just trying to figure out how to be more involved, how to get our school more involved in things, trying to take a bigger role in the UIAAA, those types of things. That's kind of where I am right now. Trying to find more classes to take, and stuff that stands out to me. So like I say, not a long journey, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Well, talk for a moment about you talked about networking and the people, but talk about the difference now that you're at Millard, you become a CAA. Talk about how your networking family, if that's the correct word, has grown so much more than what it was when you were at Tindick, when you just had maybe Travis and Clayton to deal with.
The big one is this, to me, is this right here, technology. If I'm walking down the hallway and a coach pokes their head out of their classroom and asks me a question, I can pull my phone out of my pocket, shoot a text to, you or Ron Morelli or Rich or Randy Hunter or somebody like that, and I've got an answer back in 5 minutes. Instead of walk to the office, make a phone call, so do all the howdy-do stuff. So I think technology is a big one. With the UIAAA, I can sit down and send out an email to 500 people if I want to and ask a question, and honestly, immediate responses. So that's a huge resource. So it's a whole lot easier to network now than it used to be. With the use of cell phones and technology, and I really think that the ADs in the state of Utah are way more aware of what's out there, and everybody is so willing to help that nobody hesitates to answer a question that you have ever. There's never been a problem getting a response.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk for a moment and have you share with our audience, what's one myth about being an athletic director that you would like to debunk?
I was watching Kendra last week and she hit on this.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest ones is that it's not a full-time job, because whether you are a full-time AD or are a part-time AD, it's a full-time job. And you're always going to need more time. So you really have to get good at prioritizing your time. I think that's the big one. I think there's still a lot of perception out there that, being the AD consists of some game duty and some scheduling and, get a bus here and there. And there's so much more to it than that. So I think the biggest one is that it's not a full-time job. And it's also not something that you can just be thrown into. I think being an AD is a job that you have to want to do. If you're going to do a good job of it, it's a job that you have to want to do.
Well said. What's the favorite part of your job, Blaine?
I think the biggest thing for me has been a little bit of a shift in perception. As a coach, you're always concerned about what you're doing, what your kids are doing, what your program looks like. As the AD, you're concerned about that with everybody. And so it's been a lot of fun for me to really be able to appreciate the successes of all of our programs. So I think that's my favorite part, is being able to celebrate the success of the entire athletic department and not just worried about my own programs. And then obviously, relationships with the kids, relationships with the coaches, relationships with the other ADs around the state. But I think the biggest one for me has been the reality of celebrating the successes of the entire athletic department.
Well said. Let's finish up with a couple of questions. The first one being, if you had two suggestions for a new athletic director, that they absolutely need to follow these suggestions in order to be successful, what would those two suggestions be?
Well, like I mentioned before, and I'm going to take my own advice here, get involved. Be involved with the UIAAA, be involved with the NIAAA. Get involved. It's such an amazing group of people that you're going to be so much further ahead to be involved with a group like that. The second one is reach out. Like I said, I was the new guy, had a million questions, And I've sent emails and texts and had phone calls with ADs all over the state, and everybody is so willing to help. So don't ever be afraid to reach out and ask a question if you don't know the answer. And even if you do think you know the answer, reach out. It's such an accepting group, and everybody's so willing to help each other that you'll never go wrong.
Great advice. Let's finish with this. Blaine, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
You know, I've watched a ton of these on the podcast, and I swore that if I ever got my turn, I would come up with a question instead of, oh, I think you've asked everything. So let's go with, what are the benefits of attending the conference every year?
All right, then let's have you share. What are the benefits of attending the conference every year?
The biggest one for me is making connections. The classes are amazing. The presentations, are always good. But to me, the biggest benefit of the conference is making those connections with other people that are in your shoes. They're doing what you're doing day in and day out, and the wealth of knowledge that's at the conference is just outstanding. You'll always find good advice no matter where you turn.
Well, great advice. Thank you for the plug from the UIAAA for plugging the conference. We appreciate that. That wraps it up for this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Once again, our guest today has been Blaine Burraston, Certified Athletic Administrator and Director of Athletics at Millard High School. Thanks for being on the podcast, Blaine.
Thanks, Hutch. It's been good.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.